Hi, Matt with eTrailer. If you have a 2024 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 and you plan on having this constantly loaded up and you just want some more support, or you're driving down some uneven terrain and you just want something that's going to feel a little bit better when you're driving around, then the SumoSpring Rebel Helper Springs are going to be a great option for you. So let's check them out. Now, when it comes to your suspension enhancement, there's a lot of different routes to go. None of those options are going to up the weight of what you can haul. It's just going to help provide a better ride overall. And when it comes to hauling stuff, if you are constantly hauling something, this is a great option because it's going to be constantly supporting your suspension, helping it out. Now, if you're hauling with a lot of different types of trailers, then I might suggest going with an airbag instead because you'll be able to fine-tune that to fit your needs. But if you only have one trailer that you're constantly towing with, then this is a great option. And these are actually going to be rated for 5,000 pounds. If you have lighter loads, this might feel a little bit stiff for you. So instead, I'd recommend just going with a more standard duty one. You can tell what the difference is. These are going to be blue instead of black, but they're going to work exactly the same. They're going to install exactly the same too. Now, these are just going to be rated for 3,000 pounds. But if you need something a little bit more extreme, then I'd recommend going with some Timberins. And with the Timberins, those are great for if you have those extra heavy loads, anywhere up to about 8,000 pounds. There are going to be some for those severe duty version ones. And what's great about that is, like these, they're going to constantly apply pressure, but they're a lot easier of an install. And the idea of having the max amount of weight capacity on the back of the vehicle might sound appealing, but if you have loads that are not quite meeting those specs of 8,000 pounds, you might not make contact with your axle, or on top of that, you just might have a stiffer ride overall, which won't be enjoyable. And that's where the SumoSprings really come into hand. If you have any lighter loads upwards to 5,000 pounds, any of these springs are going to be great. Just make sure you find the right ones for you. But what's great about these are they're going to come in two pieces, and these are going to be progressive load control. And what's great about that is when you kind of first make contact with that with your lighter loads, it's only going to put a little bit of tension or pressure behind that. The heavier that load becomes or the harder the bumps you hit, then it's going to apply more pressure. So when you are hitting those extra heavy bumps, it's not going to feel as jarring as opposed to some other options around. And looking at the design of this is also going to do a few other things for us. So this is more of a vertical design, and it's going to have these bumps in it. So we have this spring design to it, so when it squashes down, it's all going to stay in one spot and it won't expand out too far, making contact with any of your other suspension. Now, what's also great about these are they're going to help provide a little more support for sway. So if you're driving around with some loads on and you're making any turns, this is going to be less likely to get any of that body roll. So you're going to just have a better experience with handling. And on top of that, this is going to give you more support for your rear side. So what's great about that is you won't have any tilting that's occurring, or no tilting as much, where the front end of your vehicle goes up a bit and kind of blinds other people on the road. Or something else to think about is, since those tires on the front side be lifted up, if we had this installed, this is going to give it more traction up there, so you're going to get better turning out of this too. And one of the other big reasons these are great is this is going to add to the lifespan of your suspension as a whole. Because without that extra support, you're going to get a lot more flexing from your springs or anything else down there. So it's just going to be all working together so this can last longer. Now, what's also going to help this last longer too is just the material of the springs. These are going to be made from a microcellular urethane, so they'll be great for withstanding any of the elements, like any really extreme temperatures, any of that road grime, or any chemicals that might be on the road too. Now, for the installation of these are a little bit different from other SumoSprings. If you're in some extra light duty scenarios where you're only hauling maybe 1,000 pounds behind you, then I'd recommend some of the more smaller ones, because all you have to do to install those is just remove your old John's bumper, push up on it, or you just let down on some pressure and they'll just pop it right in. With this one, we're going to have some brackets that will bolt into place, but we won't have to make any modifications to our vehicle. So if you're curious to see that, just stay tuned. We'll walk you through the process. To start off the installation, we're just going to jack this up just a little bit by maybe a few inches. I'm doing this from our hitch receiver. And we need to make sure that our front wheels are chalked when we do this. Now the reason why I'm doing this is so we have a little bit more space to work back there behind our tire. We're going to start off with the bottom assembly. So that's going to consist of the bottom part of that spring. You can tell because it has this divot right here that goes up. And on the back side of this, you're going to notice we have one singular hole. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to grab this smaller black bolt that's going to go in here. But before we can put that there, we need to install this plate. Now it doesn't go on quite like this because it won't fit for one. So we're going to have to flip it over and line up that hole. And when we're putting that bolt in here, I got this shifted all the way to the bottom part of that hole here since it is elongated. And I'm really just trying to get this centered up on the SumoSpring. You're just going to keep tightening this down until it's hand tight. Once it's hand tight, then you're going to grab a 7/32 Allen key to get that tightened down the rest of the way. And it should just look like this once it's completely installed. And what we're going to go from here is we're going to start installing these J-hooks. This is going to grab onto your axle just like this. To give you an idea, you're just going to grab the longer bolts you have with your kit, put those through, and connect them with the little flange nut at the bottom. Now, before we do that, we actually have to take out our old jounce bumper. To actually remove this jounce bumper, it's going to be pretty difficult to try to pull on it with your hand. So what we're going to do is use a flathead screwdriver. We're going to try to apply pressure to this hole here at the bottom. And what else is going to help us is if we grab some soapy water and kind of spray up top. We're kind of spraying at the seam where everything's connected together. I'm just going to help it slide out of place. Now sometimes this can be a little bit tricky, especially if I'm not underneath the vehicle. So if you're having issues trying to grab onto it like I am right now, what you could do is apply pressure to the side at the seam here. I'm going to just get in there just a little bit, apply a little bit of pressure, just kind of going around until this kind of pops out of place. Just like that. Now we're going to take that bottom assembly and we're going to have two ears on it right here. And we want to make sure when we install that, that's away from your tire. So we don't want it like this, but like this. And this is going to mount right on to the contact pad. And we'll get this in place. And with it in this position, we can start installing those J-hooks. Now, the way this is going to work is we want to make sure that this little hook here is grabbing underneath this tab right at this location, right here. Now, just make sure you don't drop your spring because it will slide around on you a little bit. And I'm just going to drop that into position. You might have to push any type of lines out of your way, but this is what it should look like. Within that position, then I'm going to grab my bolt and nut that we talked about earlier. And when you're installing these bolts, you're just going to make sure you go from the top down and grab that nut and thread it on from the bottom. You eventually start getting it into place. You just want to get this hand tight to begin with. Now I'm doing this from the top just so you guys can see a little bit better, but ideally you would do this from underneath to make it easier. And then you just make sure you repeat that same process on the other side. Now we're going to grab a 9/16 socket and wrench, tighten this down a little bit more. It's going to help you out a little bit more too if you have a wrench for the top, just in case this does shift any. And then you're just going to do it a little bit at a time on either side. The reason why we're going back and forth is just so you don't over tighten one side and you get an uneven fit. Now on the rear side, you might also find that you don't have much room here, so you're probably going to want to come at this just with a wrench rather than a socket because there's not a whole lot of space here. And then you're just going to torque those bolts down. And you can find that specific number in your instructions. Now if you don't have a torque wrench, you can rent one from one of your local auto body shops, or we have some on our website that you can buy too. But now we're going to move over to the top assembly. So one thing we need to check is which bolts we're going to be using and where we're going to be putting them at. So we're going to be installing them in these two locations right here. They're going to be pretty close together, but they're across from one another. Once we figure that out, then we're going to grab this bracket. This is going to be the one that has the pre-installed bolts on it. And we're going to line it up with those two holes like this. With that lined up, we're going to grab our shorter bolts and we're just going to thread that through. Make sure it holds it in place. Hand tight at first. After that, we're going to grab our 9/16 socket and wrench and tighten that down the rest of the way. And with this top assembly, we can start installing that onto the top part. Now, before we do that, I just want to show you what to expect. So if I put this down, you're going to notice I have two halves of this bracket. Notice where I'm mounting it, we got this big gap here where those bolts are. It's going to mount on one side, this one on the other side. We're going to put a washer and a lock nut on. Now, I'm not going to fully do that quite yet because that needs to wrap around your bumper cup. So I'm going to take that off real quick. And from here, I'm going to put it on that bumper cup. Now, you might need to raise your vehicle up a little bit more because it's going to be a little bit tight sometimes. I'm just going to push it around and get it to fit like that. Now I'm just going to let that sit for a second. And a lot of times what you can do is just kind of let this rest on the kind of the lip of that cup. I'm going to put a hand to help support it too and lift that up until those bolts are lined up. And from here, I'm going to get at least one of these on here. This would be better if I have one on either side, but this would be a good start. And now we're just going to grab the other side, lift up on this a bit, line up that bracket, and then we're going to throw on all these washers and nuts. We want to leave this loose for right now just in case we need to change the angle of this up at all. And now we're going to start to tighten these down with a 1/2" socket and wrench. Also notice how I have this oriented. You might have to adjust yours to a different position. We are making sure that this little tab at the bottom is lining up with the bottom of this hole here. We also want to make sure that we don't have this in a bad spot. So if I have it like this, you can tell this is offset and that's not going to line up to one another. So just make sure you double check what's going to be the best fit for you. And then we can tighten these down. Now a couple of these you might need to grab a wrench because the spot right here might be kind of hard to get to. And when you do this, I recommend just holding this down. It's going to make this a little bit easier. And now we're just going to slowly lower this down. We're just trying to keep an eye on to make sure that that goes into that hole of the SumoSpring. Everything's seating properly. And once I have that all the way down, I'm just going to come by, check it out, making sure we have a good fit. And right now this looks really good. Once you have that completed, you're just going to repeat that same process on the other side. And once that's done, I recommend just taking it out for a test drive to see how it feels. Well, that was just a look at the SumoSpring Helper Springs on our 2024 Chevy Silverado 2500. I'm Matt. Thanks for watching.